Dorothy Miller grew up in a small town in Alabama, where the value of hard work was the basis of everything. His parents, tireless workers, always emphasized the importance of education. Dorothy, from a young age, showed an insatiable curiosity and unusual determination, which led her to dream of becoming a doctor. His goal was simple: ensure that everyone had access to quality health care. During her school years, Dorothy distinguished herself as a brilliant student, which earned her a full scholarship to a prestigious school. There, she discovered her passion for science and decided to pursue a career in medicine. Against all odds, she was accepted into medical school, becoming the first in her family to achieve this feat. In college, Dorothy quickly excelled, known for her work ethic and compassion for patients. After years of study and training, Dorothy achieved a prominent position at one of New York's most renowned hospitals. It was during this period that he met Scott Reynolds, a philanthropist committed to improving the living conditions of underprivileged communities. Scott became not just a patient, but a close friend, someone who shared Dorothy's vision about the importance of affordable health care. When Scott was diagnosed with a delicate condition that required complex surgery, he trusted Dorothy completely. For her, it was an opportunity to demonstrate her skill and repay the trust that Scott always placed in her. However, despite all the efforts of Dorothy and her team, Scott did not survive the operation. Scott's death was a devastating blow for Dorothy, not just because of the loss of a friend, but because of the repercussions that followed. The media and the hospital quickly pointed out flaws, and within days, his career was dismantled. Fired and her license suspended, Dorothy found herself isolated, struggling to deal with the pain and feeling of having failed. Scott's abrupt loss plunged Dorothy into a state of deep reflection. Shame and guilt were constant feelings, and loneliness led her to distance herself from everyone. The media didn't help, with headlines that seemed to blame Dorothy for a failure she could barely understand. In a moment of desperation, Dorothy decided to visit Scott's grave, in an attempt to say goodbye to him and the life she had known until then. In the cemetery, amidst the silence, she heard a conversation that left her uneasy. Two men were arguing in hushed tones, mentioning details about Scott that made her question whether everything she knew was correct. Dorothy left the cemetery with a growing feeling that something was wrong. Sadness gave way to determination to discover the truth. Maybe, just maybe, Scott's death wasn't simply the result of a botched medical procedure. Determined to understand what really happened, Dorothy began to review every detail of Scott's treatment. Although the documents seemed in order, something told him there was more to the story than what was in the reports. She began contacting former colleagues, seeking information that might have gone unnoticed. Some were reluctant to speak, but others, driven by empathy, began to collaborate. Small inconsistencies emerged, details that, when put together, formed a disturbing picture. Dorothy realized that Scott, in his philanthropic efforts, might have touched on sensitive areas, raising concerns in people who did not share his views. His health initiatives could have caused discomfort among those who saw the status quo as something to be maintained. As Dorothy delved deeper into her investigation, it became clear that Scott's death might not have been a mere accident. However, without concrete evidence, their suspicions remained just that, suspicions. Determined to move forward, Dorothy decided to seek help from Tom Jenkins, a former professor of medical ethics whom she trusted. With Tom's support, Dorothy began to formulate a strategy. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, and that time was crucial. She would need to continue gathering information, but with greater discretion, avoiding attracting the attention of people who might want to silence her. Dorothy knew her journey was just beginning, but she was more determined than ever to discover the truth. She had lost a lot, but these losses only strengthened her will to fight. Finding out what really happened to Scott Reynolds was more than a matter of clearing his name. It was a matter of honor. Dorothy knew her investigation needed to go beyond medical records and superficial analysis of circumstances. It was necessary to better understand the behind-the-scenes of what was happening in Scott's life in the months leading up to his death. She started with those who had been closest to him, people who might have noticed something out of the ordinary. His first contact was Angela Coleman, a business partner of Scott's, known for her discretion and loyalty. After several failed attempts to obtain information, Angela agreed to meet Dorothy at a discreet cafe in New York. When they sat down, Dorothy noticed Angela's nervousness. The woman hesitated, but Dorothy knew she had something important to say. Scott was worried, more than usual, Angela began, her voice low. In the last few weeks before his death, he was agitated, as if something was deeply bothering him. He spent hours locked in his office, reviewing documents, making calls that he didn't want anyone to trace. Dorothy nodded, encouraging Angela to continue. He mentioned a project, said Angela, hesitantly, something he called the Phoenix Project. He seemed convinced there was something very wrong going on, but he never went into detail. The name Project Phoenix was like a spark for Dorothy. She had never heard Scott mention it, but something inside her told her it was important. "Do you know what this project was about?" Dorothy asked, trying to remain calm despite the growing sense of urgency. Angela shook her head. Not exactly, but he was obsessed with it. He said it was going to change everything, that it was a matter of life and death. And he was always in contact with a certain Marcus Blackwood. I don't know much about him, but it seemed like a complicated relationship. Dorothy engraved the name in her mind. Marcus Blackwood, another piece of the puzzle. "Angela, you were amazing in sharing this with me," said Dorothy sincerely. "But please, if you remember anything else, let me know." After the meeting, Dorothy began investigating the Phoenix Project. His first stop was the public library, where he spent hours combing through old newspapers, corporate records, and business articles. The name Marcus Blackwood appeared in several documents related to Scott's companies, but always in a vague and inconclusive way. It was as if he was deliberately trying to remain in the shadows. Dorothy then remembered Scott's office, now practically abandoned. She still had the key and decided to check it out for herself. When she entered the empty building, the feeling of nostalgia hit her hard. The walls were covered in memories of old projects, achievements, and moments of camaraderie. But now, that place seemed desolate, echoing the uncertainties surrounding Scott's death. She headed to Scott's office, where sunlight filtered through the dusty windows. He began searching drawers and cabinets, looking for anything that could be related to the Phoenix Project. After hours of searching, she finally found a small notebook hidden on a high shelf. The pages were filled with Scott's handwritten notes, with ideas, numbers, and references to meetings with Marcus Blackwood. As she read, Dorothy realized that Scott was deeply involved in something big, something he believed was crucial to the future. But what exactly was the Phoenix Project? And why did it seem to have become an obsession for Scott? She continued to search the office, and behind a slightly misaligned wall panel, she found a small box. Inside was a folder marked Project Phoenix and a USB stick. Dorothy's heart raced as she packed the items into her bag. I needed to examine the contents more carefully, but in a safe place. Back at her apartment, Dorothy locked all the doors and windows before turning on her laptop. He inserted the pen drive, but discovered that the files were encrypted. Frustrated, she tried to open the documents, but to no avail. I would need help deciphering the information contained there. Meanwhile, she leafed through the physical documents that were in the folder. The notes detailed a research project involving artificial intelligence. The Phoenix Project appeared to be an attempt to create an advanced AI capable of predicting and influencing events on a large scale. It was a revolutionary idea, but also frightening in its possible implications. Dorothy began to understand why Scott was so worried. If Project Phoenix fell into the wrong hands, it could have catastrophic consequences. But before he could process everything, he heard a noise coming from the apartment door. Someone was trying to get in. Without thinking twice, Dorothy took the documents and the flash drive and desperately looked for a way out. The window. It was his only option. She opened the window and, despite the risk, began to climb down the fire escape. When he reached the alley, he didn't stop to look back. Dorothy knew that from that moment on, her life was in danger, but she was determined to find out the truth. Dorothy ran through the streets of New York, her heart beating in her chest like a drum. The cold night air seemed to cut into her skin, but she didn't have time to feel the cold. The feeling that she was being followed accompanied her with every step, but she didn't dare look back. He needed to find a safe place, a refuge where he could decipher the mysteries that were beginning to accumulate around him. Arriving at a prearranged meeting point with her old college roommate, Tom Jenkins, Dorothy hid in the shadows as she surveyed the scene. Tom was one of the few people I still trusted. As a professor of medical ethics and with extensive experience in scientific and legal issues, he could help her understand what was happening. Tom arrived a short time later, looking as anxious as Dorothy. They quickly greeted each other and headed to a discreet cafe, where they sat in a secluded corner. Dorothy wasted no time and passed the documents and the flash drive to Tom, explaining everything she had discovered up to that point. Scott was involved in something much bigger than any of us imagined, Dorothy said, her voice low and strained. The Phoenix Project. Looks like it was trying to create an artificial intelligence capable of predicting and influencing events on a large scale. But I can't decipher the files on the flash drive. Tom frowned as he looked over the documents. This is very serious, Dorothy. If what you're saying is true, we're dealing with something that could have enormous consequences. We need to decipher these files, but we'll do it in a safer place. They decided to go to Tom's house, a discreet location on the outskirts of town where they could work uninterrupted. During the trip, Dorothy couldn't help but feel exposed. The streets, which had once seemed familiar, were now a minefield of possible threats. When they arrived at Tom's house, he quickly set up his equipment and started working on the flash drive. Dorothy sat next to him, eyes fixed on the screen, as he typed in commands in hopes of breaking the encryption. As they waited, Tom began to share his own reflections. Dorothy, Scott has always been a visionary, someone who saw beyond the present. But this project, it seems like he was trying to do something that could change the very nature of our society, predict and influence events. This could be used for so many things, good and bad. Dorothy nodded, feeling the weight of Tom's words. I just want to understand what he was trying to do and why he thought he was in danger. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Tom managed to break the encryption. The laptop screen filled with information and graphics detailing the parameters of Project Phoenix. Dorothy and Tom were silent as they absorbed the contents. That's impressive, whispered Tom. Scott was actually trying to create an AI with predictive capabilities, but he was also concerned about the ethical implications. There are several notes here where he questions the potential use of this technology, especially if it were to fall into hands wrong. Dorothy felt a shiver run down her spine. He knew he was dealing with something dangerous. But what did he discover that made him a target? As they continued to read, one name appeared again and again: Marcus Blackwood. He appeared to be deeply involved in the project, but his intentions were unclear. In some notes, Scott expressed concerns about Blackwood's commitment to the project's ethics. In others, he mentioned heated conversations that suggested a difference of opinion about the use of technology. Tom paused, looking at Dorothy. I think Scott was trying to stop Blackwood. He saw the potential in this project, but also the dangers. And it seems like Blackwood was more interested in moving forward, regardless of the consequences. Dorothy clenched her fists, feeling anger and frustration bubble up inside her. We need to find Blackwood. He may have the answers we're looking for. Tom agreed, but his expression was grim. Yes, but we need to be careful. If he's involved, there's a good chance he's monitoring any investigation into the Phoenix Project. We can't just go up to him and ask. Dorothy knew Tom was right, but the idea that Blackwood might have crucial information made her impatient. They would need a plan, a way to approach Blackwood without arousing suspicion. Maybe we can use the media, suggested Dorothy, thinking aloud. If we can expose the Phoenix Project in a way that forces Blackwood to react, we could get the answers we need. Tom pondered the idea. This is risky, but it could work. We need to make sure we have enough evidence before we do anything. And we need allies, people who can help us get the word out. Dorothy nodded. She knew the road ahead would be full of challenges and dangers, but there was no turning back now. Scott had trusted her, and she was determined to honor that trust, no matter the cost. As Tom continued to decipher the files, Dorothy began to formulate a plan. They would need more information, more evidence, and perhaps even a network of people willing to fight for the truth. It was a monumental task, but Dorothy felt she was on the right track. The night wore on, but Dorothy was more awake than ever. The truth was within reach, and she would do whatever it took to uncover it and ensure that Scott's legacy would not be in vain. Dorothy felt that time was running out. With each new revelation, the weight of what I discovered became more oppressive. The information contained in the Phoenix Project files not only confirmed Scott's fears, but also revealed the magnitude of the impact this technology could have. The Phoenix Project had the potential to shape humanity's future, but Marcus Blackwood's intentions remained shrouded in mystery, adding to the sense of urgency. Tom continued to work on deciphering the files, while Dorothy devised a plan to get closer to Blackwood without arousing suspicion. I knew I couldn't confront him directly. He was a powerful man, with resources and allies who could quickly deflect any attempt at questioning. She needed to be strategic, approaching people connected to him who could provide information without realizing the true objective. Dorothy decided to start with Meredith, Scott's former personal assistant. If there was anyone who could know more about the interactions between Scott and Blackwood, it would be her. Dorothy had already contacted Meredith before, but now she needed to deepen the conversation. She arranged a meeting in a remote park, a safe place where they could talk without fear of being overheard. When Meredith arrived, Dorothy noticed that the woman was even more nervous than last time. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held a small bag. "Meredith, I need your help," Dorothy began, keeping her voice calm and collected. "I know that Scott was involved in something very important, something he believed was vital. But I need to understand better what was going on between him and Marcus Blackwood." Meredith looked around, as if afraid someone might be listening. "Dorothy, I really don't know much. Scott was reserved when it came to business with Blackwood. But there was one night when he was more distraught than usual." Dorothy bowed slightly, encouraging Meredith to continue. "He was in the office late," Meredith said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I left, I heard him arguing on the phone. He was talking to Blackwood, and from the tone, it was a difficult conversation. Scott mentioned something about lines that couldn't be crossed. I don't know what that means, but he sounded serious." Dorothy's mind began to work frantically. "Do you know anything else about the Phoenix Project? Or any references to it in the conversations Scott has had?" Meredith hesitated before answering. "I saw the name on some documents Scott asked me to file, but those documents disappeared after he died. I don't know where they went, but I was under the impression he was worried about what Blackwood might do. You mentioned that Scott seemed to be trying to stop something, Dorothy said, reflecting on Meredith's earlier words. Do you think he was trying to stop Blackwood from moving forward with the Phoenix Project? Meredith looked down, avoiding Dorothy's gaze. I don't know, Dorothy. I just know that Scott was scared. He never told me that directly, but I could feel it. Something was bothering him deeply, and I'm sure it was related to what he was working on with Blackwood. Dorothy took a deep breath, taking in everything Meredith had shared. Thank you, Meredith. I know this isn't easy to talk about, but what you told me could be crucial to understanding what really happened. They said goodbye, and Dorothy felt that she was one step closer to the truth, even though the danger was becoming more and more palpable. She needed to act quickly before Blackwood realized she was getting too close. Back at Tom's house, Dorothy shared the new information. Tom, who was immersed in analyzing the files, looked up, intrigued. If Scott was trying to stop Blackwood, that means he must have encountered something he believed to be a real threat. We need to find a way to use this to force Blackwood to expose himself. Dorothy agreed, but knew they needed to be cautious. They decided that the best way forward was through a more discreet investigation, using the media to raise subtle questions about the Phoenix Project. If they could instigate a response from Blackwood, it could provide the opening needed to expose their intentions. Over the next few days, Dorothy and Tom began to assemble a trusted team of journalists, scientists, and ethicists. The idea was to create a network that could act on different fronts, questioning the Phoenix Project without directly drawing attention to Dorothy or Tom. They knew it was a dangerous game, but it was the only way to put pressure on Blackwood. Meanwhile, Dorothy continued her own investigation, trying to find out more about Blackwood's contacts and recent activities. The more she researched, the more it became clear that he was surrounded by influential people, all willing to protect his interests. With each new discovery, the siege seemed to close around Dorothy and Tom. They knew they were touching something much bigger than they imagined. But they couldn't stop now. The truth was close, and they needed to continue, no matter what it cost them. That night, as Dorothy looked at the distant lights of New York City, she felt a mixture of fear and determination. I was walking a fine line, but I knew I couldn't give up. The truth needed to be revealed, and she was willing to go all the way to ensure Scott's legacy wasn't destroyed. With the new information in hand, Dorothy felt the time to act was approaching. It had only been a few days since his last conversation with Meredith, but the sense of urgency only increased. Blackwood was not an easy man to reach, but Dorothy knew that if she could connect the right people, she could force him out of the shadows. Tom continued his parallel investigation, focused on deciphering every detail of the Phoenix Project files. What he discovered was unsettling. The capabilities of the artificial intelligence that Scott was developing were impressive, but there were a number of subtle references to possible applications that could be morally questionable, depending on who was in control. The Phoenix Project has the potential to be used in ways that Scott clearly did not approve of, said Tom, showing Dorothy some of the documents he had managed to translate. If Blackwood has complete control over this, he could shape the future in ways we can't even imagine. Dorothy nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility they now carried. They needed to act with precision, as one wrong move could not only put their lives at risk, but also compromise the safety of many other people. They decided it was time to involve the media, but in a controlled way. The first step was to contact a trusted journalist, someone who could help tell the story without revealing the source. Dorothy knew Kate Morrison, an investigative reporter with a reputation for integrity and courage. They had crossed paths a few years earlier, when Dorothy participated in a panel on medical ethics, and Kate stood out for her incisive questions and her ability to dig deep into the topics she covered. Dorothy called Kate and briefly explained the situation. The journalist, always curious, agreed to meet Dorothy in a discreet cafe in the Soho neighborhood. As they sat down to talk, Dorothy realized that Kate was eager to hear what she had to say. "Kate, what I'm about to tell you is something that could have huge repercussions," Dorothy began, keeping her voice low. "I'm investigating the death of Scott Reynolds, and what I've found so far points to a project he was developing, something called Project Phoenix." Kate frowned, clearly interested. "What exactly is the Phoenix Project?" Dorothy explained what she knew, omitting the most sensitive details but making it clear that the project had serious implications. She also mentioned the involvement of Marcus Blackwood, suggesting that he could be using the technology for purposes that Scott would not approve of. Kate listened intently, taking notes as Dorothy spoke. "That sounds like a big deal, Dorothy, but I'm going to need more than just words to move this forward. We need solid evidence." "I know," replied Dorothy. "That's why I'm looking for you. If we can plant some questions in the media forcing Blackwood to react, maybe we can find out more. But we need to be careful. He's powerful, and he won't hesitate to shut us up if he feels we're getting too close." Kate nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll start investigating. I can ask some discreet questions, see if I can gather more information without attracting attention." Dorothy thanked her and left the meeting feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. "I knew I had taken an important step, but I also knew that things could get complicated from that point on." Meanwhile, Tom continued to unravel the files, increasingly worried about what he found. Scott was trying to limit the reach of the Phoenix Project, but Blackwood seems to be more interested in expanding the capabilities of AI, even if that means pushing ethical boundaries, he told Dorothy one of the following nights. Dorothy felt a chill when she heard this. Blackwood was not just an ambitious businessman. He seemed willing to sacrifice moral principles to achieve his goals. But how can you expose someone so well protected? Tom suggested that they gather more information before making any riskier moves. "We need something that directly connects him to the misuse of the Phoenix Project. If we can get proof that he is violating Scott's original intentions, we could attract the attention of other powerful people who could turn against him." Dorothy agreed, but knew time was against them. With each passing day, Blackwood became stronger, and the chances of exposing him diminished. They needed a solid blow, something that would destabilize their control over the project and expose their intentions to the world. It was then that Tom had an idea. What if we use the technology itself against him? If we can program a version of the Phoenix Project to identify patterns that could reveal Blackwood's intentions, that could give us the evidence we need. Dorothy considered the proposal. It was risky, but also brilliant. If they could manipulate the AI to reveal Blackwood's true intentions, they could turn the tide in their favor. "Let's do this," she said, determination building within her. Over the next few days, Tom and Dorothy worked tirelessly to adapt the Phoenix Project code. They were in a race against time, knowing that every mistake could be fatal. But at the same time, they knew it was the only way to expose the truth and ensure Scott's legacy was honored. As they worked, the tension increased. Dorothy knew they were approaching the end of the game, but the outcome was still uncertain. If they succeeded, they could change the course of history. If they failed, everything they had fought to protect could be lost forever. Dorothy and Tom were immersed in their work, programming and tuning the Phoenix Project's artificial intelligence to reveal patterns that could expose Marcus Blackwood's intentions. The nights became longer and the days shorter as the pressure increased. Every detail mattered. Every line of code was a critical piece in the puzzle that could determine the fate of not only theirs, but Scott's legacy as well. "We're almost there," Tom said one night, after hours of non-stop work. The AI is already identifying patterns of behavior that deviate from Scott's original intentions. The next step is to correlate these actions directly with Blackwood. Dorothy felt a wave of relief mixed with anxiety. They were so close, but they also knew that any mistake could be fatal. "We need to make sure everything is perfect before we activate the AI," she replied, voice strained. "We cannot leave room for error." While Tom finalized the adjustments, Dorothy turned her attention to Kate Morrison, who continued her journalistic investigation. Kate had discovered that Blackwood was preparing to announce a new phase of the Phoenix Project, something he planned to use as a springboard to strengthen his influence across various industries. It was an ambitious but risky move, and Dorothy knew it was the perfect opportunity to act. Dorothy and Tom agreed with Kate to release a discreet story, raising questions about the ethics and safety of the Phoenix Project. The idea was to plant enough doubt that Blackwood would be forced to react publicly, creating an opening for Dorothy and Tom to present their findings. Kate's article was published on a reputable news site and quickly began to gain attention. The text, careful and precise, did not directly accuse Blackwood, but asked incisive questions about the true intentions behind the project. Answers began to emerge in the following days, with experts and industry leaders debating the implications of what was presented. Dorothy and Tom watched everything closely, waiting for Blackwood's reaction. They knew he couldn't ignore the matter for long, and they were right. Just 48 hours after publication, Blackwood announced that he would hold a press conference to clarify misinformation about the Phoenix Project. "That's it," said Dorothy, feeling her heart quicken. "This is our chance. We need to be ready to expose everything as soon as he tries to distort the facts." On the day of the press conference, Dorothy, Tom, and Kate gathered in a discreet room, with their laptops and equipment ready for action. The tension was palpable, each of them aware that the next few hours could change everything. Blackwood took the stage with the confidence of someone who knew how to manipulate a situation to his advantage. He began with calm, measured words, praising Scott's work and stating that the Phoenix Project was a continuation of his vision. But then he began to insinuate that the concerns raised in Kate's article were unfounded, the result of misinformation and irrational fears about new technologies. It was the moment Dorothy and Tom had been waiting for. As Blackwood spoke, Tom activated the modified AI, connecting it to the press conference's live feed. The artificial intelligence began to cross-reference the data it had on Blackwood with the real-time information he was presenting, looking for discrepancies and patterns that could unmask him. Suddenly, the AI found something. "Dorothy, look at this," Tom said, pointing at the screen. The AI had identified a series of Blackwood's actions that not only deviated from Scott's intentions, but also suggested that he was manipulating the results of the Phoenix Project to further his own ambitions, regardless of the ethical consequences. "That's what we need," said Dorothy, her voice full of determination. "Kate, send this immediately to the journalists, you know. We need this out before Blackwood has time to react." Kate wasted no time. With the precision of a seasoned professional, she began sending information to her contacts, while Tom prepared a live broadcast in parallel with the Blackwood press conference. They couldn't wait to see how he would react. They needed to take the lead. Within minutes, social media and major news sites began to explode with the new revelations. The hashtag #CharmProjeto Phoenix Verdade began to spread quickly as journalists and experts began to openly question Blackwood's intentions. On stage, Blackwood began to sweat. He realized he was losing control of the narrative, and his responses began to falter. Dorothy watched intently, knowing they had accomplished something important. But I also knew that this was not the end. As the press conference disintegrated into a chaos of questions and accusations, Dorothy and Tom remained focused. They had exposed the truth, but they knew that Blackwood would not back down without a fight. They needed to be ready for anything. Blackwood's press conference had turned into a chaotic spectacle, and the repercussions of the revelations made by Dorothy, Tom, and Kate echoed throughout the world. Blackwood's carefully constructed narrative crumbled before the audience, and for the first time he seemed to be on the losing side of a dispute. But Dorothy knew the battle was far from over. Even with the new information circulating widely, Blackwood still had power and allies who could help him turn the situation around. The fight for the truth, as Scott had realized, did not end with a single victory. In the following days, the pressure on Blackwood increased. Investigators began opening inquiries into the Phoenix Project, and the media demanded clearer answers. However, Blackwood was not a man who gave in easily. He used every resource at his disposal to try to reverse the tide, hiring lawyers, launching public relations campaigns, and even trying to divert attention with new corporate advertisements. Dorothy, Tom, and Kate knew they needed to keep up the pressure. They worked tirelessly to ensure that the evidence against Blackwood continued to be widely publicized and that the public did not lose interest in the case. But at the same time, they knew they needed to be careful. Blackwood was still dangerous, and any mistake could mean the end of his investigations. Tom, ever meticulous, continued to refine the artificial intelligence to ensure that all new discoveries were revealed accurately. "We need incontrovertible proof, something that directly connects Blackwood to the unethical use of the Phoenix Project," he said, his voice tinged with weariness. Dorothy agreed, but felt time was running out. "We need something that's a final blow, something he can't counter." It was then that Tom found a hidden file within the AI's data, something that appeared to have been deliberately hidden. The file, when deciphered, revealed a recording of a conversation between Scott and Blackwood shortly before Scott's death. In the recording, Scott confronted Blackwood about his intentions, making it clear that he did not approve of the direction the Phoenix Project was taking. "That's what we need," said Tom, almost unable to believe his luck. "This recording is proof that Scott tried to stop Blackwood and that he knew he was dealing with something dangerous." Dorothy felt a lump in her throat as she heard Scott's voice once again. The recording was emotionally devastating, but it was also the weapon they needed to put an end to Blackwood once and for all. With the recording in hand, Dorothy and Tom knew they could force a full investigation, something not even Blackwood's resources could prevent. Kate, who continued to be an essential ally, prepared a final report, this time bringing to light the recording along with all the accumulated evidence. The article was published in all major media outlets, and the response was immediate. The pressure on Blackwood became untenable, and he was forced to resign from several positions of power as the investigation moved forward. Dorothy finally felt that she had done justice to Scott's legacy. The fight had been long and arduous, but the truth had prevailed. However, she also knew that the world she and Tom had helped shape still faced many challenges. Technology, as powerful as the Phoenix Project, could be used for good or evil, and it was everyone's responsibility to ensure it was directed in the right direction. As the weeks passed, Dorothy and Tom began to consider how they could continue to protect the integrity of Scott's work. The Phoenix Project still had the potential to do good, but only if it was used ethically and transparently. They then decided to form a coalition of experts, scientists, and ethics advocates to oversee the future development of the technology. In a simple ceremony, Dorothy visited Scott's grave once again. He placed a flower on the ground and remained silent for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. "We did it, Scott," she whispered. "We exposed the truth, and now we will ensure his legacy is honored." As she walked away, Dorothy felt a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "I knew that no matter what the future brought, I had made the right choice. The truth would always be a heavy burden, but it was also the only thing that could bring justice and redemption." As she walked back to town, Dorothy knew that the fight for truth and ethics was never over. But, with people like Tom and Kate by her side, she felt prepared to face any challenge that came her way. The Phoenix Project was just the beginning of a new era, and Dorothy was determined to ensure that this era was marked by integrity and a commitment to the greater good. And so, with the weight of the mission accomplished and her eyes fixed on the future, Dorothy moved forward, ready for whatever came next.